Okay, so soon we will have the new r/fantasy Reddit bingo prompts for the upcoming year. That always happens in April. I always do a recommendation video / tentative yearly TBR for that. I get pretty excited. It's a very challenging board, especially if you want to do everything on like extra hard mode. And this year, I was not very successful. I was more successful than I thought I was, but I was not very successful. Especially since when I typically do this, I try so hard to do everything on hard mode, but last year was a lot. And so reading to strict prompts for the sake of it wasn't really my vibe. And so we're going to go through what I have read, what prompts that didn't get to be done, and let you guys know how these books went or not. I don't think, honestly, I read anything specifically because of the Reddit bingo. I think I just went through the 100 or so books I've read and was just like, does this fit this prompt? Does it not? Did I accidentally do this or not? So let us go through. First is the one that was title with a title. For this one, I read Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I read that for a different project. I read that for my Goodreads Choice Awards, reading all of the nominees, which was a wild, silly thing that I did when I was very depressed. But, you know, and that was pretty fun. I'm excited for the sequel. It's definitely a very first book. I personally do not think there is a good finished arc in this first book. But before I realized it wasn't going to have a satisfying arc, I was having a good time. So, you know, pretty good. I didn't read anything with superheroes. I consume a lot of superhero media, but I didn't read anything. So I don't have anything for that. I think I wanted to read Hench, but I just never got around to it. Bottom of the TBR, I read Theft of Swords, and that has truly been on TBRs for like years. So I think that definitely counted. I think hard mode was just, no, this is just hard. You don't have to do a specific hard mode prompt. And like I've talked about in other videos, I like it, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, and it's kind of made me not motivated to keep going, even though I should, because I know there are later books and other series that people love. I don't know. Eventually, I'll get my life together, and I'll get back to that. But I at least finally read the first book. The Magical Realism prompt. I put The Last Tale of the Flower Bride here, but I don't know if it really counts. I can't tell. Because a lot of people don't even consider it fantasy, which can kind of be the hallmark of magical realism. Because it's like kind of sort of the, is it real, is it not real? Although like there is an actual definition for magical realism that has to do with its history in Latin American literature. But that was not what the fantasy board was kind of based off of. And I think the hard mode was just don't pick something from a list, which was annoying because I wanted to read things from that list. But I guess that's why it was hard mode. It's also generally not a part of literature that I lean into a lot, mainly because it can definitely kind of flower a prose style that can be really hard for me. Sometimes it can work really well, but sometimes the prose style with magical realism can make me feel untethered. Like, I don't feel like I'm grounded enough, and I'm confused. And as someone who doesn't have a very strong visual imagination while I read, I need something to tether me, and it's normally the words. So, yeah. But I really liked Last Tale of the Flower Bride, another book I read for that Goodreads Choice Award project. Young adult. I don't know if this is a cheat, but I put a middle grade. Or at least it's marketed as middle grade. Because I really didn't know, I didn't realize that I had literally read 0 young adult books. I'm not very good at reading young adult books. Let's just put it that way. I don't know. It's not a thing I do very often. Because I was even checking, because the 1 young adult books that I did read last year were all before April. And so it's April to now, and that's when I read like all the ones for the Young Adult Goodreads Choice Award Challenge. And I read the newest Cassandra Clare, but all of that was before April. So after April, the only book not for adults that I read was Wolfish. And Wolfish is pretty good. I mean, it's not really for me, but I could see young me loving it, if that makes sense. I think it's a little long for what it is, but I do love the fairy tale influences. I thought the art was really precious. It's by, I think it's the same publisher who did The Last Contista, so like they have really good production on their books. Because I saw it in person and I almost got it. It's a beautiful cover. So I read that one for the Ursula K. Le Guin in fiction challenge that I did for myself. Mundane jobs, I did bookshops and bone dusts. Working at a bookstore seemed mundane. The hard mode was in a secondary world. Didn't like this one as much as Legends and Lattes, and again read it for the Goodreads Choice Awards challenge that I did. This one was hard. Published in the aughts. Apparently I didn't read many things published in the aughts, just period. And then the hard mode was not having it be in the top 30 of some list on Reddit. And here's the thing. They lump Realm of the Elderlings all together, right? Which, fair. But I would argue the one that I put for this prompt is not in the top 30 because I put down the Dragon Keeper, which is technically in the Realm of the Elderlings, which means it doesn't count for hard mode. But we really going to say that people put Rainwild Chronicles as itself in the top 30? I would say that probably it wouldn't make that list. But regardless, I concede that it did not make this on hard mode. I did not have a book with angels and demons, but did hear recently Niveau is going to be writing a novella with that type of situation, so that should be fun. But apparently I just don't read a lot of books with angels and demons in them. I just don't. The closest one that I got to maybe trying to read was Sign Here, and I don't even know if technically the main character who's trying to get the family to sign this Faustian deal is a demon, or just like a dude who works for hell. Like, I don't know. There's a difference, right? Short stories, New Suns 2. That's the one I put down. I read a bunch of anthologies and collections. I get hard mode for this one, like, without even thinking about it each year. But New Suns 2 is the best one I read. That was an anthology. And then the best one I read that was a collection is Drinking from the Graveyard Wells. It's this blue cover book. New Suns 2 I read for me. Drinking from the Graveyard Wells I read for the Ursula K. Le Guin in Fiction project. I don't know why I started telling you why I read certain books, but a lot of them apparently were for specific video idea projects that happened to work for this chart. There's the Horror Square, and I think this was like super easy. I think it just didn't need it to not be Stephen King. And at the time when I was updating this, I put Leech, which is a very cool gothic sci-fi horror. I think if I had been like updating this chart though, I would have easily put My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, because that's like one of my favorite horrors of last year by like a long shot. Regardless, this was very easy. One of the weirdest things I learned from last year was that like apparently the books that brought me the most joy were horror. Who knew? There was the self-published / indie published square, and this one's always really hard. And like I did read some self-published, and I did read from some indie presses, but none of the ones that made it for hard mode. So like the self-published book I read was Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. And then I'm trying to remember, I do definitely read from indie presses. So like I read Arbor Reality. That's from a small indie press, but that wasn't one of the indie presses that had an Ask Me Anything or something like that. So like I do kind of read those things, just not in a way that makes it so I accomplish hard mode. And I mean, I also am just more than willing to admit that this is something that I'm not as well read in. And I have complicated feelings about it just because I think to some extent in sci-fi fantasy, there is an ability for more voices to be heard in self-published and indie. But I'm not actually sure if in practice that's what's happening. Like, maybe I'm really wrong, and someone can point me to an amazing video or recommendation list with, like, you know, all the marginalized voices that are being highlighted in self-published. But I feel like it's not necessarily doing that work as well as trad publishing is, and that's what I kind of tend to prioritize first. So which is why I think just, like, without thinking about it, I'm naturally not as good at reading indie published works. But again, this could all be false. So someone please show me a video or a list and I will go do more research. More than willing to be taught. The next book, I couldn't tell if it was hard mode or not, but I put Brother Alive. So this is for the Middle East category, and it was like bonus points if the author was of Middle Eastern descent. And I'm fairly sure the author is, but he's fairly private about his life, so I'm not positive. But Brother Alive does take place in the Middle East in the later half of the book. It's also only sort of speculative, but it's like literary speculative. I read this for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize in Fiction, and it actually grew on me quite a bit. I was one of the ones that I was almost going to DNF. So that was interesting. Published in 2023 and a debut, The Sun and the Void, a book I wanted to love so much more than I did, but I didn't. And maybe I'll read the sequel if it doesn't take a century to come out. Or even if it does take a century to come out, if it gets like glowing reviews, I'll read it. I do not like it just because of like problems with like debut works in general the last couple of years. There's just like, I don't think the editing care or expertise being used. And I know like this book in particular had issues with one editor leaving because they were leaving Orbit and stuff like that. But there was apparently some TikTok drama about this book, which I like did not understand. People do not know how to read books anymore. Apparently, because there would be people who were DNFing it because they thought it was problematic, which you can think anything you want. Like, I'm not saying people can't have opinions, but it's just like on the page, I remember so many points where it's like, yeah, that's put there so that the author and the characters can show you how bad that is. Like, It's like the whole point. Anyways, literacy is dead everywhere. Multiverse, I put The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Surviving Medieval England. We all know I don't love that book, but it fit the prompt, so here it is. We have A Person of Color author, and it was supposed to be like a sci-fi book if I wanted hard mode, and so I put The Blue Beautiful World by Karen Lord, which is on a long list for the Women's Prize and Women's Prize of Fiction. Is that what it's called? Women's Prize for Fiction, which is so exciting to me, but also I don't know how people will receive that book who choose to read the list, especially because I bet none of them are going to read the other books in the series first. It's just going to be interesting, but I'm really happy it's getting recognized. Like, that's awesome. I have a should you read. I really recommend reading the other two books in that world before reading that one, because, maybe people are just smarter than me. Who knows? I just feel like you wouldn't have the vocabulary to understand what in the world's going on without the world building of the first two books. All right, next one is the prompt that's always so stupid hard for me, and that's the book club prompt. I just don't participate in Goodreads book clubs. I just don't. But I did look through, and I happened to have read a book that they read, and that was The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher. It was good. It's not my favorite T. Kingfisher. I have learned that I think I lean more towards her, weird old women characters, her humor, and, banter in her fantasy romances a bit more than the fairy tale retellings, I think. I think that's where I'm landing. The novella that was not Tor.com is Rose House by Arcady Martin, which was a disappointment for me. Just read that last month. In theory, my wrap-up is already up where I discuss more of my disappointments. But as someone who loves her duology, this was not it. Mythical Beasts, I chose The Bone Shard War, which I read, and I have a should you read for that series. Wow, last year was long, because I feel like it's been forever since I've thought about that book. Yeah, I don't dislike that book more than I did back then, but I have forgotten it completely. But it has mythical beasts. They're cool. Elemental magic, okay, this might be a stretch, but I really didn't have anything else. So I put Fourth Wing, because they have elemental magic. People acquire magics when they connect with their dragon, and it's not always elemental, but there are people with elemental magic. And one of the characters that we know has elemental magic. So I'm counting it. Myths and retellings had to be not Greek, and so I put Victory City for this. Now, I don't know if it really counts because it's only loosely based on a pretend origin story of an important location in, I think, South India, but I think it feels enough like that genre of Greek retelling. I cannot talk today. It feels a lot like the genre of Greek retellings and things like that I felt comfortable putting it here. And I really liked it. That was one of the ones I read for the Goodreads Choice Award project that surprised me a lot. And in the last row, we have Queer Norm, Labyrinth's Heart. That was the one I planned to read for this, and I did read it because I love it. I have an author interview with those authors if you want to know, and I have a should you read for that if you want to see it. Coastal or Island, I did The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. Yeah, I like that book. I think it's good. I don't think it's amazing, and I don't think I liked it enough to continue the series. But it was good. It was very solid. Okay, here's another one that's probably a stretch, but I really didn't have anything else. And this was Druids, and it couldn't be this one book that I didn't read anyways. And I put The Surviving Sky, mainly because on the recommendations list, people were putting The Burning Kingdoms, and I was confused by that, but I guess it had to do with the plant that people have, plant-like communal energy. And there's plant communal energy in The Surviving Sky. So I felt like that overlap was enough to rationalize putting it here. Another book that I thought was only okay, but it's fine. This one, robots. Okay, robot main character. I don't know if you're allowed to count ships as robots. And even if you don't count ships as robots, I'm pretty sure there were other characters I could count towards this, but I don't want to go into details because spoilers. But I'm putting the Velocity Gate, Catalyst, Velocity Weapon, Chaos Vector, Catalyst Gate, that trilogy here. Because at various points, you definitely do have robot type, or it depends on our definition of robot, and I'm stretching it. I'm saying, non-human sentience, machine sentience. Maybe that's wrong. I didn't read anything with your traditional robot main character. But in this series, I feel like the spirit of it might exist here, it might not. Like I said, this Reddit board was a challenge for me this year. And then the last square was sequel, and I think the hard mode was being like the third or later in a series. So I put the fourth book in the Dandelion Dynasty, Speaking Bones. It was great. Got an author interview with Ken Liu. People are reading it right now and also screaming about it, and it makes me happy. Oh, I love that series so much. Speaking Bones, an amazing finale. Absolutely amazing. And if you don't know, that third and fourth book, if you're like, that third book doesn't have an ending. Correct. It doesn't. It's the third and fourth book where one book literally split in half because they didn't know what else to do. And like, there were different choices you could make, but that one made it easier for binding and stuff like that. I don't remember if it was in my interview or a different interview that I watched with Ken Liu where he talks about that, but it was really interesting because, you know, not only was I there for the interview with him that he did for me, I have watched many of his interviews because that man can talk about some really cool things for a really long time, and I'm just always down to listen. So that's my Reddit bingo board. We'll see what the prompts are next year, because sometimes it's just some prompts are easier for me to fill than others, especially with, like, excitement. Like, I typically just don't care that much about robots, so that was hard. I just don't care that much. So sometimes I just hope that along the way, I will read a book that happens to fill a prompt. And same with druids. We're not really writing about traditional druids right now. So that was really tricky. Anyways, how is your Reddit board going? And just as a reminder, you don't have to complete the board to turn it in for like points or stuff like that. Like, I don't actually know how the quote unquote prizes or points work. I just like this as like a bingo board that I do throughout the year. But I will link the announcement for the Reddit bingo, my previous video. And if you choose to do this, like, you can just have completed rows as things that you submit and stuff like that. So you don't have to do the whole board. I just always like to try and do the whole board. And this year did not work out, but that's okay. If you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, I don't know. Leave something fantasy. Like, this is the fantasy bingo board. Just pick a fantasy emoji that speaks to you. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.